The great hall of Valethorn smelled of pine candles and cold stone. Every seat was filled. Every breath in the room was held. Outside, the winter wind pressed against the tall windows. But inside, the warmth of 100 bodies and a dozen burning hearths kept the chill away. Alpha King Darian Ashvale stood at the front of the hall in his ceremonial coat, dark as midnight, with the silver chain of his office resting across his broad shoulders. He looked exactly as a king should look, steady, commanding, unmoved. His dark eyes scanned the crowd once, briefly, and then settled forward. Beside him stood Leora Voss, dressed in a flowing silver gown that caught the light of every flame in the room. She was beautiful by any measure, composed and graceful, the daughter of one of Valethorn's oldest and most powerful noble families. She had been chosen carefully, the council approved, the people accepted, everything was in order. And yet, beneath the surface of Darian's chest, something had been quietly wrong for weeks. He had told himself it did not matter. A king did not rule by feeling. A king ruled by reason, by duty, by the choices that kept the kingdom standing. He had made his choice. He had committed to it. That was enough. At least, that was what he had told himself every morning since the announcement. At the far edge of the crowd, pressed close to the side wall near the rear corridor, stood a young woman who was trying very hard not to be noticed. Sarah Callum was not dressed for celebration. She wore her usual healer's clothes, practical and plain, her dark hair pulled back simply. She had not planned to be here at all. She had told herself she would leave before the ceremony began. But something had made her stop in the hallway, just for a moment, just to see the hall one last time before she walked out of the kingdom forever. Her traveling bag was already packed in her room. Her resignation papers had been signed and accepted that morning by the head of the healer's quarter. Her horse was waiting in the stables. She had 1 hour before she needed to leave. She told herself she was only watching, that it meant nothing, that she could stand in this hallway for 5 more minutes and then go. The ceremony began. Sarah watched the High Elder step forward, raising his staff, his deep voice carrying through the hall as he spoke the ancient words of the claiming ritual. The crowd was perfectly still. Even the candles seemed to stop flickering. The ritual was simple in structure, but sacred in weight. The Alpha King would speak 3 lines of the old vow. He would then lean close to his chosen Luna and breathe in her scent, a physical act that, if the bond was true, would cause a visible, unmistakable response from his wolf. A brightening of the eyes, a calm that settled over him like morning light. The wolves in the crowd had seen it at other ceremonies. They knew what it looked like when a bond was real. Darian spoke the first line of the vow. His voice was steady and clear. He spoke the second line. Leora tilted her chin slightly, composed and ready. He stepped forward to complete the third line, and as he leaned toward her, as the hall held its breath, nothing happened. Not the absence of a dramatic response. Something quieter and worse than that. His eyes did not brighten. The tension in his shoulders did not leave. His wolf, which should have surged forward in recognition and peace, went completely still instead, as if it had turned its head away. The silence stretched by 1 second too long. The High Elder's brow furrowed almost imperceptibly. A murmur began to pass through the crowd like a slow wave. Leora's fingers tightened at her side, though her expression held. Darian straightened. He pressed his jaw tight and began to speak the third line anyway. His beta, Rowan, appeared at his shoulder from nowhere, quiet as a shadow, and said in a voice only Darian could hear, "Your Majesty, your wolf is not accepting her. Everyone is going to see it." Darian went very still. Rowan leaned slightly closer. "Step back for a moment, I'll cover it." Darian stepped back. Rowan smoothly addressed the crowd, announcing a brief pause for the sacred meditative portion of the ceremony, a detail that did not exist in the ritual, but that no one in the crowd was confident enough to question. Darian walked calmly to the side corridor. The moment the heavy door closed behind him, he exhaled. He pressed one hand against the stone wall and stood there for a moment, eyes closed, trying to understand what had just happened inside him. He had been certain he could do this. He had been certain duty would be enough to carry him through. His wolf had its own opinion about that. He pushed away from the wall and turned to go back. That was when Sarah came around the corner. She was moving quickly, head down, already planning the fastest route to the side door that led to the courtyard and the stables beyond. She was done watching. She needed to go now, while she still had the will to do it. She did not see him until she walked directly into his path. He caught her arm to stop them both from colliding. And the world stopped. It was not a gentle thing. It was not soft or subtle, or easy to dismiss. The moment his hand touched her arm, Darian's wolf came fully awake for the first time in years, roaring forward, straining, every instinct he had, suddenly pointing in one direction with the force and clarity of something that had been waiting a very long time to be acknowledged. The scent hit him next. It was impossible to describe, and impossible to mistake. It was the thing he had been searching for without knowing he was searching for it, the missing piece of a question he had never thought to ask. He stared down at her. Sarah had gone completely still. Her eyes met his, and she did not look away, though he could see the effort it took. She had known this would happen, if he ever touched her. She had been so careful, for 6 months, to make sure he never did. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "I was not watching where I was going." Her voice was perfectly calm. That was what struck him, how calm she was. He realized, slowly, that this was not surprise on her face. She already knew. She had known before this moment. "You know," he said. It was not a question. She stepped back, out of his grip, and smoothed her sleeve. "Congratulations on your ceremony, Your Majesty. I hope the rest of the evening goes well." She turned and walked away. He stood in the corridor and watched her go, and did not call after her. When he returned to the great hall, the ceremony continued. He spoke the third line of the vow. Leora received it graciously. The crowd applauded. The celebration began, and the great hall filled with music and laughter, and the sound of a kingdom satisfied. Darian moved through the evening like a man under water. He smiled where smiling was required. He spoke where speaking was required. He sat at the head of the table and performed every function of a king celebrating a successful ceremony. By the time the first hour had passed, Sarah's room in the healer's quarter was empty. A folded letter sat on her bed, neatly addressed to the head healer. The stable boy reported later that she had left just before sunset, riding east toward the border road with a single bag. Rowan brought Darian the news at the end of the evening, when the guests had thinned and the music had softened. He placed her letter on the table in front of the king, not her resignation letter, which had gone to the head healer, but a second letter that had been left on the hall's side corridor floor, apparently dropped without realizing. It had Rowan's name on it. Inside, in careful handwriting, were 3 lines. She had written, "Please do not look for me. I am not running from anything. I simply chose to leave before something was taken from me that I cannot afford to lose. I wish the king and his Luna a long and peaceful reign." Darian read it once, folded it, set it down. Rowan said nothing for a long time. Then, "She knew, didn't she? Before tonight." "Yes." "And she left anyway." Darian did not answer that. Rowan sat down across from him without being invited. He was the only person in the kingdom who could do that without consequence. "Leora came to me an hour ago. She asked to speak with me privately. She said she felt something was wrong during the ceremony. She is not without instinct, even if she is not your mate." He paused. "She said she would not stay where she is not truly wanted. That her family's pride is not worth building her life on a false bond. She is leaving tomorrow." Darian looked up. "She made the choice herself," Rowan said, and she seemed relieved. The night deepened. The hall emptied. The candles burned down. Darian sat alone in his study with Sarah's letter on the desk in front of him and the sound of the winter wind returning outside, and he felt, clearly, now that the noise of the evening was gone, the mate bond stretching eastward, thinning with distance, not breaking, but pulling. Every mile she put between them felt like something slow and insistent moving through the center of his chest. He had made a choice. He had stood in that hall and completed that ceremony, and told himself it was the right thing. He had believed, or tried to believe, that being a king meant being above the demands of instinct. He sat with that belief now, in the silence, and found that it had very little to say for itself. 3 days later, Rowan rode east. He found Sarah at a small riverside inn 2 towns from the border, sitting alone in the corner of the common room, with a bowl of soup she had barely touched. She looked tired, Not broken, not weeping, just quietly, thoroughly tired. The way a person looks when they have been holding themselves together through pure will for longer than they should have. She saw Rowan come through the door and closed her eyes briefly before opening them again. He sat across from her without being invited. He placed an envelope on the table between them, sealed with the king's mark. "He sent me to find you," Rowan said. "He would have come himself, but he thought you might run faster." Sarah looked at the envelope. She did not reach for it. "He chose her," she said simply, "in front of everyone." "He made an error," Rowan said. "He knows it. Leora has formally withdrawn from the claiming. She left of her own will. She holds no anger toward you." Sarah was quiet for a moment. He didn't choose wrong because he didn't feel the bond. He chose wrong because he felt it and went ahead anyway. Those are different things. Rowan was quiet because she was right. She pushed the envelope back across the table. "Tell him I wish him well. Read the letter." "Tell him I wish him well." Rowan picked up the envelope. He stood. He looked down at her with an expression that held no judgment, only a kind of tired honesty. "He pulled 3 years of palace records last night. Your records from the healer's quarter. Every patient file. Every note you wrote. Every after-hours shift you covered. He sat with them until dawn." He paused. "I have served that man for 12 years. He has never done anything like that." He left without another word. Sarah sat with her cooling soup in the quiet of the inn and stared at the wall. She did not go to sleep easily that night. 4 days later, on a morning that was gray and cold and smelled of coming snow, she stepped out of the inn to check on her horse and found Darian Ashvale standing in the muddy courtyard. He was alone. No guards, no formal coat, no crown. He was dressed plainly in a dark traveling coat, his hair slightly disordered from riding, and he looked, for the first time in the 3 years she had known him from a careful distance, like a man instead of an office. He did not move toward her. He did not speak with command in his voice. He simply stood in the cold morning and waited, and when she stopped and looked at him, he said, "I made the wrong choice. I knew it was wrong the moment I made it. And I let you leave because I was too proud to admit that a king had been looking past the right answer for 3 years." Sarah crossed her arms. "You completed that ceremony." "Yes. Deliberately. Yes. And now you are standing in the mud, outside a roadside inn, expecting me to come back, because you finally understand what you walked away from." "No," he said. "I am standing here because I read 6 months of your handwriting last night. Because I sat with your patient notes until I could hear your voice in them. Because I realized I had spent 3 years in the same palace as someone worth knowing, and I had been too busy being a king to notice her at all." He stopped, exhaled. "I am not here to reclaim anything. I gave up the right to claim. I am here to ask. That is different." Sarah looked at him for a long time. The wind moved between them. Her wolf was very loud in her chest, but she had learned to be louder. "I did not leave because of the bond," she said finally. "I left because I wanted to be chosen, not because it was convenient, not because nature required it. Chosen. I know," he said. "That is why I am standing in the mud and not sitting on a throne, waiting for you to be brought to me." She looked at him, at this king who had come alone to a courtyard in a border town to stand in the cold and say true things in a plain voice. She thought about the letter he had not sent, the records he had read through the night, the guards he had left behind. "I need time," she said at last. "Take it," he said, as if it were simple. "You will not push." "No." She studied his face. He did not look away. She had spent 3 years learning what his expressions meant from a careful distance, and she had never seen this one. Something open in him, uncovered, the pride still present but no longer in the way. She gave him a slow, measured nod. Then she went inside to ask the innkeeper for a second breakfast plate. He came in out of the cold and sat across from her, and they talked for the first time, not as king and healer, not as a man of consequence and a woman at the edge of his attention, but as two people sitting in a warm room while snow began to fall outside. It was not a perfect conversation. It was not seamless or easy. There were long silences, and at least 2 moments where she said something honest that clearly cost him his comfort, and he sat with it rather than deflecting. She noticed that. She filed it away. 3 weeks after that morning, on a clear afternoon when the snow had settled into a clean white calm across Valethorn's hills, a familiar horse passed through the palace gate. Darian was waiting, not in the throne room, not in the great hall. At the gate, holding it open himself, which had made his guard captain quietly lose his composure in the background. Sarah rode through and dismounted. She looked around at the courtyard she had left, and then at him. "You came back," he said. "I came to see whether you are worth the trouble," she replied. Something moved at the edge of his expression. "And?" She looked at him, this king who had chosen wrong and knew it and came to the mud anyway, who had read her handwriting through the night, who had waited without commanding. "Ask me again in a year," she said. He nodded once, as though that were more than fair. And he held the gate a little wider,